And we have a great panel as our final panel to talk about the impact of this issue in rural America. And so we are just incredibly grateful to have Molly Hillegas, who is the Senior Director of Welcoming America. Molly leads the strategy to maintain and grow a membership network of municipalities and nonprofit organizations in the United States. Welcoming America is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that leads a movement of inclusive community and assists immigrants with the resettlement of rural communities. Aaron Lehman is the fifth generation farmer and the president of the Iowa Farmers Union. Aaron's been outspoken about the role that immigrants play, not only in the U.S. food system, but as vital members of our rural community and our rural population, literally reinvigorating towns all across the Midwest. And Cesar Blanco represents the city of El Paso, a place that I've been to many times. In fact, back in the day, I actually crossed over the bridge without carrying any ID. You don't do that anymore, but it's a beautiful city and with an incredibly multicultural history and background, and probably one of the best places that we could talk about where you see that urban rural analysis, where you really see the opportunity for rural counties and urban counties to work together to thrive. And so thank you all for joining us. Before we get into individual questions, and as I said, feel free, this is our last panel, so we're going to do a little free for all. Feel free to talk to each other too. You don't need to wait for a question from me because your experiences are so diverse. But also you all share a common value, which is we have to figure this out if we're going to grow the rural economy, but if we're also going to be the country that has led to the continuation of being the greatest country in the world. And so we'd like to just have you guys start out by telling us how the current immigration policies and approaches of this administration are really affecting your community. And Senator, we'll start with you.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to join you all. Such an impressive panel. Really look forward to the conversations. It's let me just first start by telling you what the district that I represent. I'm right on the Texas-Mexico border, and I represent 9 counties that stretch out from the whole western bend of Texas. It's about 25,000 square miles. The big industries are trade, oil and gas. I represent parts of the Permian Basin, which is some of the largest oil and gas producing counties in the world, and agriculture. So pretty different cross section, but represent all those areas. And all of it is along the Texas-Mexico border. So we deal with a lot of the immigration policies and the approaches that this administration has implemented, which really impact our rural communities. First and foremost, there's a lot of uncertainty and there is a lot of inconsistency with how this administration is approaching immigration. And the challenges that we're facing is that it's really creating consequences in rural communities like mine. We are already facing things like workforce shortages. We're dealing with shortages in agriculture. We're dealing with shortages in the oil patch, where a lot of our employees are, and then in healthcare. So these policies have really impacted those industries, and especially those aimed at broadening deportation priorities that the administration has prioritized. It's the fact that they're restricting legal pathways is also deepening the challenges. So, as you all know, when rural employers can't find the workers that they need, production slows down, prices go up, and families, especially family farms, struggle. I'll give you an example. One of the industries in my district is the sheep and mohair industry, and a lot of the workers that come from that have the skill of sheep shearing, many come from Mexico. There's a lot of folks in the United States that don't know how to do this, and a lot of our workers come in and they're seasonal. Some stay longer, but that is a skill set that is difficult to teach. It's a skill set that is difficult to teach over the long term, and we don't have that ability to recover those workers if they're deported or there's uncertainty. We've seen a lot of the videos of Border Patrol raiding farms and things like that, chasing after workers, and it's just really putting our ag industry in a big under a lot of uncertainty. So it's been a challenge. We've heard President Trump talk about farmers. We need to see what that actually means, and if he's a farmer's guy, let's see what that means, because right now this situation is really hurting industry. So that's kind of a snapshot on our in our area down in West Texas.
If I can take a liberty and just ask a couple follow-on questions, and we know that the president said that he was going to exempt farm workers and hospitality workers from the deportations, but that was quickly refuted by other people in his administration. And so, are you seeing workers staying home? Are you seeing workers self-deport? What is creating your worker shortage, Senator?
Well, Senator, you're absolutely right. We've seen all of that. It's all of the above, really. When you look at the farms, a lot of them are staying home. They're not showing up to the work site. In many places, and I'll give an example, Home Depot or Lowe's, you see day laborers every single day out there, where construction companies or workers go say, we need some laborers for the day, come on in, they hire them. They're no longer there. There are students that have grown up in Texas that may have been born in Mexico or in other countries that attend public schools, and they're no longer showing up to school because parents are concerned about their deportation status. They stay home with them because they don't want to leave their kids at home, and then they don't go to work, right? So we're seeing the ripple effect, the fear, the uncertainty across our district, really across the state. And we haven't seen those exemptions. We haven't seen that go into effect. So we're really concerned about how that's going to impact our economy. Keep in mind, Texas is a Republican state, and we are always focusing on moving from the eighth largest economy to the seventh largest economy in the world. You can't do that without an immigrant workforce, and it's put us in a very difficult situation.
Very interesting. Molly, what about you? How is all of this affecting your work?
I'll just start out by saying thank you, and thank you, Senator, both senators, for your comments. I do really agree that we're hearing a lot of fear and fatigue, especially in our rural communities right now. As you mentioned, Welcoming America does work with a broad swath of communities across the country, but about 75 or so of our member communities are rural, and so Midwest and Southwest, all over the place. But I do think that some of the enforcement is happening more concentrated in some places than in others yet. But I do think that the chilling effect of those policies and the nervousness that folks are feeling are still having the exact same kinds of impact that the senator was sharing about folks sort of stepping back from public life in ways that are really harmful to the vitality of the community generally. And it really, those kinds of federal policies are really undermining the work of local institutions, local elected officials who are still out there trying to keep community cohesion intact, but are also struggling with the burden of shrinking budgets, growing political pressure, and policies that just make everyone's job more difficult. I'd also just note that the immigration policy becoming so punitive and unpredictable just really creates chaos. And I think one of the values that rural communities really hold on to is around stability, and holding on to the stability of the life style and the community that, as we'll hear from Erin, of being a fifth generation farmer, being someone who's lived in the community for a really long time, and having that sort of stable undercurrent. And when that starts to get sort of imbalanced, I think that causes a lot of harm.
Yeah. Erin?
Well, I think we're hearing some of the same things as well, is that the policies have caused so much chaos and inconsistency. And, we have to remember that our communities here in Iowa and Iowa agriculture have always relied on a very robust immigrant labor force, and our communities have been shaped by the immigrant stories from decade to decade to decade, all up into current day. And so when we get, it's always been important to have that part of our community be integral to who we are, and it's integral to our industry. We entered in, before we were entering this period of chaos, with labor shortages already. Many of our supply chains were disrupted because we did not have a consistent labor force, and we had issues already. Injecting this level of chaos, it just makes the problem so much worse. And by that I mean, there's certainly there are stories of deportations and community disruption as it is. It does us no good to whipsaw back and forth from one direction to another either. And we heard that farm workers and food service workers were going to be exempt, but that was changed. We heard that farmers were going to be in charge during the president's address here on July 3rd here in Iowa. But that was quickly whipsawed back by the secretary earlier this week. That type of chaos is felt all the way down into our fields, onto our farms, into our rural communities. And it really shows that we are not valuing our rural communities. We're not valuing the farmers' needs and our food system needs. Because that level of chaos just means that we are going to experience more labor issues. We are going to experience higher prices to bring a good product onto people's plates, and that level of uncertainty for our communities stresses us all the way from our farms to our local businesses on Main Street, to our schools, to our churches, all the way across. That level of chaos is doing damage.
Yeah, Senator, you intimated about what this means for the overall economy. And during the campaign, what we heard, and what I think a lot of immigrant families heard, was as long as they didn't commit a crime, there would be no deportations. They just didn't realize that they included the crime of crossing the border without proper documentation in that range of criminal behavior that would lead to deportations. So let's just assume for a minute that every person who is undocumented in each one of your areas of expertise, whether it's Iowa farmers or your district senator or your communities, Molly, we just deported everyone who is there undocumented. What do you think would be the impact to your economy of your district senator?
It would be devastating. Let me give you some numbers. About 17% of the residents in the state of Texas are foreign born. And about 12% of its US born residents live with at least one parent who's an immigrant. So when you look at all of that, immigrants make up about 22% of the labor force in our state, which, as you've heard from some of our other speakers, it makes up a huge part of our state's economy in so many ways. So, it would hurt industries. It would devastate agriculture because that is the labor force in agriculture in Texas. It would devastate my oil and gas area because when you look at who's working on the rigs, who's doing the water hauling, those are all immigrants doing that work. So that would devastate our oil and gas. When you look at construction, 40% of the labor force in the state of Texas that is in construction is immigrant labor. Huge, huge. So that doesn't, not to mention all the hospitality. We've got aging population that needs healthcare. A lot of these folks work in healthcare as well. So there's so many sectors that are key to keeping our economy robust, making sure that our economy is competitive globally. This is really going to hurt us. When you look at how it's going to impact our agricultural industry, our ag industry is already, the current system already fails to support predictability and stability within that workforce. This only complicates it even more. When I talk to my farmers and I listen to them, they always tell me about the difficulty in locating qualified, available, authorized workers, both foreign and domestic, and that's why they rely heavily on such a high rate of undocumented labor. Our own commissioner of agriculture has already stated that the immigration enforcement crackdown, and he's a Republican, it's already taken a toll on our agricultural industry in the state of Texas. So those are several sectors, but I mean, when you look at ag and you look at construction, they're really going to take the hit here in the state of Texas, and that's just a bad scenario for us.
Yeah. Aaron, what about, I mean, at one point when I looked at the Iowa population growth, if but for immigration, you guys would have lost population. It really was immigration, and that whether that is in food service, whether it is in meat packing, your pork industry is heavily dependent, dairy is heavily dependent on workers, many of whom are not documented. And so, I mean, why isn't your governor stepping up saying, whoa, 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 you're going to hurt my economy?
Yeah, and that's an excellent question. 2/3 of school districts in the state of Iowa are declining in enrollment. They are almost all in our rural communities, except those communities where there is a vibrant immigrant population. And those school districts are the ones who are increasing enrollment, and their capacity to educate is increasing as well. So that's an excellent question. If we pride ourselves on feeding the world, and Iowa taking a leading role in that, how can we seriously do that if we are picking and choosing how we make political points? And what suffers? The Iowa ag economy suffers, and our total Iowa economy suffers as a result.
So, Molly, you obviously represent or work with a lot of political subdivisions, but I kind of ask you the same political question. Do you see some attempt, nonpartisan, you're a nonpartisan organization, for people to step up and say, you know, these policies are really hurting. We see coalitions being built around tariff policies saying, you got to slow this down or you got to give us more consistency. Doesn't mean that's going to be a change in policy. But I don't hear political leaders in our part of the world that are nonpartisan stepping up saying, stop it, this is not helping.
I think one of the things that we are all probably hoping for is leadership coming from the business sector in many ways, and whether that is really loud leadership or quiet leadership. I think all of these industries really need that, and they need spokespeople to be taking those concerns up to the federal level. I was just thinking in particular about a set of communities that we've worked really closely with in Southwest Kansas. It's typically known as the beef triangle, right? About a third of all of the beef that is consumed in the US comes out of 3 cities in Southwest Kansas, Dodge City, Garden City, and Liberal. And I just think about what the impacts would be there if all of a sudden a large amount of that workforce, which I think the foreign-born or immigrant folks working there make up, I think quite a bit of the population of folks. I know most of the immigrants there are working age. About 61% of folks that are there are doing that kind of work. And so I think when we think about the impact of policy decisions and of business decisions and how that would sort of impact that, how that would affect the rest of our economy and food prices across the country, I think we are really looking at being stuck between a real rock and a hard place if some big decisions are not made. And so I think it's my hope, and folks I think who work in economic development are also kind of doing their best, I think, to do some lobbying around what can we do to protect our workers. And I think the dairy industry again is another one that is just really hard to sort of figure out what the solution is for, because dairy is not a seasonal job. And so there's, for instance, never been, agricultural visas available to folks who work on dairy farms. And so fixing some of those policies, I think, needs to also come to the forefront in this kind of a situation.
Well, I keep wondering what the inflection point is for kind of bringing some rationality back to this. Is it increased food prices? Is it strawberries rotting in the field? Is it, the Chamber of Commerce's in states like Iowa and Minnesota and Texas saying, this is not working? But one of the things I would tell you, we did a comprehensive immigration reform package when I first got to the Senate, passed with almost 70 votes. Can you imagine? Bipartisan. It had a path forward for many people who were there undocumented, and it ended up landing in the House with one word: amnesty. And so can we, I know this wasn't necessarily something you guys were counting on, but I want to talk a little bit about the argument that some people would have, which is that all of these people jumped in line. They came undocumented. They didn't come under the system. There's tons, there's millions of people who would like to come. Why should they get some advantage now? If they were undocumented, why shouldn't they have to go home and apply to get back into our country? What would be your argument, Senator, for whether that's the right way to look at it or the wrong way to look at it?
Well, great question. There's a magnet that's drawing folks to this country, and they're coming here and finding jobs. And most of these folks that are coming in from a variety of countries, not just Latin America, but everywhere else, are coming here for opportunity. And it's an opportunity to work and make a better life for themselves and their families. But the hard truth of it is somebody's hiring them. And somebody's hiring them because somebody can't find the labor to take the jobs that many people can't do or won't do, or just not enough people to do, right? So we've got to find a place in our country, I think specifically in Congress, where we remove the politics of immigration and talk about what this country needs Sure, there's got to be a process to vet who's coming in. As someone, as a Hispanic that represents well over 350 miles of border, we should have a strong border security system in this country. But we should also have an immigration process that it complements our economic needs, that complements the needs of feeding the world, not just our own country, making sure that our heritage of agriculture in this country is not lost. There's so many people. I can go to any county in my district, and I can talk to a farmer or a rancher whose children are not going into agriculture. It's difficult work. It's not easy. It's painful, and we're losing that heritage in our country because the immigration system is, in many ways, doesn't complement what our agricultural industry needs.
Right.
So, I think it starts in Congress. I think it's unfortunately it's removing the politics. We can do both border security and create a comprehensive immigration reform system, but it's got to focus on the needs of the country. And I think right now we need workers, we need labor, and we have people coming in who are willing to work.
No doubt. Aaron, what do you say to the farmer next door who says, "Come on, Aaron, I mean, they committed a crime. They should have to go home and do it right. And why are you defending them?"
Yeah, well, in reality, we can do both, right? We can have border security and we can meet the needs of a comprehensive immigration policy that does provide a path and provides what we need in our community. We need work done to secure our food system. To suggest otherwise is just silly. We heard a suggestion earlier this week from the halls of Washington that no, we can do agriculture with only American-born labor, and maybe we should go to the Medicaid rolls, or maybe we should go to the SNAP rolls, and that would fill all our needs for our food system. And that would be a disaster for.
I guess you're going to have some 67-year-olds milking cows.
Yeah, well, the cows are not going to get milked. We're not going to get milk on the table. Meat is not going to get processed. Food is not going to get served. I was thinking, for the people who made those silly suggestions and they went out to lunch afterward, who do they think cut that meat that is on their plate? Who do you think picked that vegetable that was on their plate afterward? There's a real disconnect between the reality, the practical needs of a real immigration system that protects our borders and provides a strong path and secures our workforce. There's a real dichotomy between the needs, the practical needs, and the political points. And when we can get away from the political point making, scoring points politically, and get to our practical needs, as the senator suggested, that's where we'll find the practicality. That's where the Senate found some practical solutions a number of years ago, Senator, and unfortunately wasn't able to cross the finish line on the other chamber. But as soon as we can say we need to ground this in practical reality, the sooner we are going to be to find a real solution.
So Molly, when you're working with political subdivisions, obviously you have many, diverse political opinions. Are you seeing a coalition build around, this is good for our economy? Or are you seeing people, I wouldn't say punitive, but people who support a policy that every person who is here undocumented has to return to their home country, or I guess an El Salvadorian prison, just saying?
I mean, I would say that, for the most part, local leaders, and I'm talking local leaders, mayors, county commissioners, people on the school board, they are much more pragmatic when it comes to thinking about how to support everyone in their community. And I think from Welcoming America's standpoint too, and we've had lots of folks from all different, political orientations across the country saying things like, we know about the national conversation, we know about the national rhetoric, but what we need to do is take care of our neighbors, right? And if we go back to the example of Dodge City and Garden City in Kansas, 88% of the folks who are immigrants have been there for more than 5 years. That is enough time. I mean, I know across the Midwest that we have big feelings about people, when you get to become, a native. I've lived in La Crosse for 13 years and I still don't think it's quite there, but I know that people become fabric of their community in these spaces, right? And they participate and they do all of those kinds of things. And so I think when you're talking about your neighbors, and you're talking about the residents of your town on a local level, it is much easier to bridge those divides about people who have come to work, they live there, they're paying their taxes, their kids are going to school, they're dating your kid, or they're best friends with your kid, or they're playing baseball together. Like, these are the kinds of communities that people don't want to see disrupted because of I don't know, the criminality, or what we've decided is the criminality of a border crossing. And so those kinds of pragmatic conversations, I just feel are significantly easier in local hyper-local spaces.
So I have a question, and this may be unfair, but for every undocumented worker who is on a job site, whether it's a drilling rig, whether it's a construction site, whether it's in, a dairy farm, there's somebody employing them, right? There's somebody who I think either they might say they didn't know, but come on, they know. I mean, if ICE knows, they can know, right? And so how come I haven't seen, and maybe it's just not being reported, arrests of employers who are employing illegally employing undocumented workers? Have you guys seen any of that in your state or your district or in your communities? Let's start with you, Senator. Have you seen arrests across Texas of employers who are employing undocumented workers?
Well, not nearly as much as you see as undocumented individuals being arrested. And I think that there's always the discussion, and I don't like to fall into the discussion about arresting those employers. I think what we need to focus on, those employers are hiring people because they need workers, right? And they're unable to hire those individuals because that workforce isn't available. But I do think that it requires bipartisan leadership that's practical, that's not necessarily punitive. I think, for example, as it relates to E-Verify, efforts to mandate strict E-Verify requirements across all sectors, including some of the small family farms. It may sound tough on paper, but they're often ignored. And the reality of how rural employers operate is not the reality that the government addresses it. Most small producers don't have the human resource departments or access to legal counsel, and they're being asked to act as immigration enforcement agents without the tools or protections to do it right. So when you look at some of these federal policies or even state policies, because even Texas is looking at, passing E-Verify laws, we're creating confusion. There's confusion about compliance. There's in addition to that, the workforce shortages. So especially in agriculture, where the only legal pathway for many employers, specifically the federal H-2A program, it's not working, and it's very slow, and it's too expensive, and it doesn't match the seasonal realities of Texas, and I'm sure of many other growers and ranchers throughout the country. So I'm hesitant to say, yes, we need to go arrest those, but my perspective is that we can't afford to look at immigration only through the lens of enforcement. We have to, if we do, I think we risk hurting the very people in the industries that fuel our state's economy. So I want to make sure that there's balance in that. So instead of doing these mass arrests and deportation of workers or mass arrest of employers, why don't we fix the system that's broken? Like what? Instead of taking punitive efforts to hurt those that are here to work and those that are trying to find labor.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that I think workers or employers should be arrested,
No,
but
yeah,
it does, yeah, but to me, it's what creates the pressure for immigration reform.
Right.
When I mean, I'll just tell you a story. I was in Texas and I was at an event with a banker, very prominent regional bank in Texas, and they should all go home. And I said, what would that do to the construction workers who have money in your bank? What would construction companies, I mean, and he's like, it didn't dawn on him that his whole financial base was based on the labor of these workers. And so, I mean, I just think that sometimes there's this disconnect. We love employers and we should. I mean, people who create jobs, hugely important to the American economy. But yet we are only going to publish the people who work with their hands and not the people who own the businesses. And that to me, it's not as much about punitive as it is how do we get people to understand how critically important these workers are to the economy. When you look at Molly, kind of where you are, do you see employers concerned about basically retreating, or are they just going to keep doing what they're doing until ICE shows up? Or what has been the reaction from the employer base, from the Chamber of Commerce folks?
Well, I can speak to a couple of different pieces. We have been working with a set of folks in upstate New York, and they had been working really closely with some sets of asylum seekers who were coming in, who had work authorization, through that process, and had been sort of working in the tourist industry there. And so the employer supports from the state of New York and other places were actually coming together really, really well to support those workers and to think about workforce development in a really holistic view of like, okay, people need housing, they need childcare, they need wages that, can support their family, all of those kinds of things. But then as folks are starting to lose that temporary protected status or asylum, or their asylum claims are being dismissed, and their work authorizations through that process are being revoked, you do see that employers really are really unsure what to do in those spaces, because again, they have labor shortages, they need workers, they really like this person, they have trained them, they've become part of the success of their business, and now they're really the ones, I mean, also the individuals of course, but the whole industries then are bearing the brunt of these kinds of this kind of chaos, right? And so I think folks are trying to work with their legislators and those kinds of things, but I don't see a lot of movement currently, and so I don't know what that's. I mean, I think that people are just kind of holding their breath a little bit in a lot of places.
Well, and Aaron, I want to kind of cue this up because you talked about, what people know and what's coming out of Washington. But obviously, you and I both know the former governor of South Dakota, who started a whole I-29 corridor. You bring here and we'll bring you workers. I mean, people were concerned about locating businesses in that corridor, and she promised workers. Well, she knew darn well, and I would talk about Kristi Noem, that these workers did not come with official paperwork. It wasn't like she was there checking it off. She wanted those workers to grow the South Dakota economy, but apparently now that's changed. And and I'm trying to look at, for all of you, like, how do we look politically respectful? We need to understand that there's a lot of people in this country who are concerned. They've been told that many people who are here are dangerous. They've been told they're the worst of people. That's not who you're seeing in your communities. You're seeing hardworking people who are looking for opportunity, as the senator said. But how do we change the politics to create the pressure to change the policies? How do we do that in a state like Iowa, where
Yeah.
immigrant workers are so critical to your economy, but yet politically, that's not kind of Iowa's position?
Yeah, I think you do it from the ground up, right? I think you do it by having those conversations uh, at your farms, at your Main Street businesses, at your local schools, in your local institutions, and you start building up from there. Because once you have those conversations, you'll see people saying, you know, this is not ringing true. What a outside narrative is what's going on in my community. Let's make sure that our community priorities are being placed forward, and we're advancing those and building that support from those conversations, from those activities, from the ground up. I think is really key. That's really the only way we'll make a dent in people who are just trying to speak from an outside perspective, trying to score political points. And it's
Yeah,
happening.
but Aaron,
Yeah.
who takes that responsibility? Who leads that discussion? Because typically, I mean, we had a whole thing in North Dakota where the governor was encouraging immigration. Of course, now the governor's in the administration story is a little different, right? But
Right.
you know, when the governors were leading this, saying how important it was, or you know, the Chamber of Commerce or the Business Roundtable was leading the discussion, you know, then that had that credibility. But everybody's ducking, it seems to me.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that, I don't know, that this just washes over and things change tomorrow. I mean, we've seen the president try and initiate a policy for rural America for agricultural workers, only to have it walked back 2 days later. That's happened a couple times now. So
Yes.
the message is one of chaos and unclear. And as a result, people are staying home and people are looking at not finding opportunities where they otherwise would find opportunities. So who leads that? Who leads that discussion, Aaron?
Well, I think that's exactly right, Heidi. That's the problem. I think we're seeing folks who understand in their community what the impact is, but they're trying to lay a little bit low because of the political fallout that they may face by speaking up. And how do you get those folks from understanding, listening, understanding, but saying, now it's time for us to speak up and to make a difference and move forward. There are folks who are just waiting this out, hoping that cooler heads will prevail. Well, they're only going to prevail if we all in our community speak from the ground up. Unfortunately, we're not seeing the leadership come from the administration that's going to say, we're going to bring some common sense to this solution. They're thriving on the chaos. It's part of the strategy is to have chaos. And unfortunately, the only way to combat that is to say, we're going to have practical solutions come from the ground up.
Yeah, so the interesting thing to me is this gets conflated frequently, and this is to you, Senator, with policies that if you don't look like an American, I don't know what that is, because I watched the athletes coming in on Olympic opening day, and America looks like America to me, which is very diverse, which is this wonderful cultural kind of confluence of opportunity, people who come here for opportunity. But there is this, okay, if you're Norwegian, you're okay coming here because you're us. But if you're coming across the border in Mexico from Latin America, you're somehow not, you're not going to assimilate the same way. How do you see that in Texas? Because Texas is so multicultural, huge multicultural state. How do you see that playing out in Texas, or is that just not an issue?
Well, look, I think first there's got to be an acknowledgement that immigrants are in many ways a backbone of our communities, and a majority of families in my district and certainly West Texas and throughout the state of Texas Everyone's got an immigrant story, from the Germans that settled in Central Texas to the Asian community in Houston to the Mexican American that are really all over the state of Texas. We all have an immigrant story, and so we've got to get to a place where that understanding that attacks on immigrants are attacks on themselves at some point, right? And it becomes very personal. So in many ways, I think a lot of these harsh policies are hardening, support for immigrants, and we need to be able to, step a generation back and take a look at our own families and see where they come from, because at some point we're all immigrants. But, I think that's part of the American story too. I mean, that's what makes this country so strong. I think of all the hardships of all over the world, whether it's in Europe or Latin America, the trips to get here, the struggles to make it, and we get those people in this country, right? We want those people in this country that are determined, that are hopeful, they've got grit, right? That's what we want. That's what has built this country, regardless of race. So we've got to change the mindset, and we don't want to be a place where immigrants don't go to anymore, because that's going to negatively impact our competitiveness globally. So, we just got to change the mindset. We've got to change the politics. Yes, we should all have strong borders. We all should have safe borders in our country, but we should all also have some fluidity in terms of meeting the economic demands of our country, which makes us a strong country. When you look at what's happening in China, and the global power that it's becoming, how are we going to compete, for future generations of Americans, for America, if we're not bringing in people that can be part of that fabric? So we've got to change the mindset. We've got to remove the politics, and we got to focus on how do we make this country stronger. And I think comprehensive immigration reform balanced with border security is a way to do it.
Yeah, I was on the border. I spent a lot of time on the border, did a lot of work on border security. And we met a young man who had, he started out in Bangladesh, ended up came across to Chile, walked all across South America, walked to the border. I think he came in through Cuba. I'm not sure exactly how he weaved his way in, but Senator Angus King and I were standing there. He goes, "Man, we should want that guy. We should want
Absolutely.
somebody with that kind of gumption in our
Absolutely.
country." I just thought that, it's common sense. Like,
Yeah.
these are not faint-hearted people. These are not, weak-minded. These are strong. But again, we've created a draw, like you said, a magnet to the economy, but without the right kind of steps. And the other thing that I would say, because I think it doesn't get said enough, if we did temporary workers, everybody, I think, maybe on the left assumes that these folks want to become United States citizens. That's not necessarily true. Some of them want to be Mexican citizens and are willing to go home, but they're also worried about whether they can feed their families. And so I love, Molly, the title of your organization, Welcoming. So what are some of the strategies that you've used to create communities that are more welcoming, that the senator talked about, where we eliminate the politics and talk about the quality of the people and the quality of the work that's being done? So why Welcoming America?
Yeah, so I think one of the things I think that the senator was talking about, and also Aaron, is that we really need to continue, to share the story of our own immigration and our community's growth and all of those kinds of things. And I think one of the ways that one of the focuses of Welcoming America is really about building connection across lines of difference, right? We know that our communities will thrive when long-term residents, regardless of their ethnic background, come together with newcomers and, can weave the fabric of society. And I think we see all kinds of super innovative folks doing that like all over the country in small towns and large cities. Just for example, I was thinking about one town in the Midwest where a local church, and an immigrant-led nonprofit came together, and they put in like a multilingual community garden. And folks from the community were able to come together, and sometimes they would grow some foods that maybe some of the folks were unfamiliar with, or they would make meals in the garden. And like, they're just these very simple, like not rocket science ways to kind of bring people together. And I think that's in some ways easier in small communities. I also love to tell a story about Austin, Minnesota. So Austin, Minnesota, maybe you've heard of it. You can go to the Spam Museum. I'll just give a little plug. But apparently they had a terrible basketball team. Everyone knew they had a terrible basketball team. And then they had a group, then the demographics in their community shifted actually really rapidly. And they had a bunch of folks come in to start working in the meat processing plants. And the folks in that community really gravitated toward sports. And they have this like beautifully multicultural basketball team, and they win state championships all the time. And everyone in the town is so proud of that. And like, these are the kinds of things, right, that bring people together across lines of difference. Their identities sort of like meld in together of all being people from Austin, Minnesota, and not like, oh, these folks are refugees from West Africa, and these folks were born here. And I think, again, we can see all kinds of really cool things like that happening all over the country. And just continuing to be able to lift that up and bring that up and provide a counter narrative and try to break through the noise is hard. It's really hard right now. But I think we can do it.
Everybody in Austin may be happy, but they aren't happy in Moorhead because they can't compete.
Well, I know.
Yeah. Anyway, I just want 1 minute responses. If you thought Donald Trump was watching this, which I'm pretty sure he's not, but if you thought Donald Trump was watching this, give me a 1 minute, what you would say to him right now that would respond to your community's concern. And we'll start with you, Senator.
Well, it's a great question. I think that I would say if you were really concerned about lowering costs for the average American, deporting a workforce is not the way to lower costs. We need to find solutions that allow for a fluid, responsive, skilled workforce to ensure that our economy remains strong. So if you got elected because of costs, because of the economy, deporting hundreds of thousands of people is not a solution, and we need to implement comprehensive immigration reform now.
Molly, what would you say to the president?
I think very similarly, I would say that there is a narrative, I believe, behind sort of the politics of today that is about strength. And I think we're sort of thinking about that in a little bit the wrong way. And if we really want to make our country really strong and be the sort of, I guess, powerhouse that the president really focuses on so much, that we need to consider the vitality of our communities. And the vitality of our communities is based on everyone in those communities feeling like they belong and that they can contribute socially, economically, and civically. And the policies that are happening right now, creating the fear and the chaos, really is putting us on the wrong track for that. And so by investing in rural communities, by investing in agriculture, by investing in an immigration system that works practically and pragmatically for the American people, again, yes, of course, while preserving border security, I think we can become stronger. And so I think that's what I'd say.
So Aaron, you get the last word to the president.
Well, I would say that our history is full of immigrant success stories. Our agriculture has always depended on a diverse workforce, and it still depends on a diverse workforce. And if we can stop making political points and get down to what we really need and value in our communities, we will have a food system that can thrive with that rather than being used as political points.
Well, I wish you were listening to all three of you. You're all doing really important work. And I think that people look at the immigrant experience, and so much of it's been focused on LA and on Chicago and on New York and, you know, all of the major cities. And yes, that the immigrant experience there is critical, but it is essential to rural America. And it's part of who we are. And you know, I always find it interesting because rural America is, people always ask me, well, how would I be taken? And I say, they'd accept you because if you live in their town, you're one of them. Because we have to be nice to our neighbors because we have so few of them in rural America. You guys,
I mean, especially if you play basketball, you're in. Like,
if you can play basketball, you're in, or football in Texas, I guess.
yep.
Or I don't know what the heck you don't do down there in Iowa. Oh, women's basketball in Iowa, right?
Mm-hmm.
Women's
Amen.
basketball,
Well,
wrestling, football, we
yeah.
do it all here.
Yeah. Some of it better than others. We do hockey. And so those Canadian imports are really important to North Dakota's, you know, image. Anyway, thank you so much, all three of you. What
Thank
a
you.
fabulous panel and what a fabulous opportunity to have a really important conversation. So, you guys, that concludes our Rural Policy Summit, a Progress Summit, and I want to thank all of our terrific guests and panelists for joining us over the last 3 days. We're going to be back with our 5th annual Rural Progress Summit, and this panel is going to return, and we're going to do, did President Trump listen to us when we were giving him great advice, follow up, but all of the people who participated, this is a rich source of important dialogue and hopefully trying to build the understanding that we promote at One Country Project between urban and rural America. We are, you know, when I started this project with Senator Donnelly, we had a debate about what we're going to name it, you know, and a lot of like Rural Country Project, blah, blah, blah. I said, no, it's one country. We spend so much time dividing ourselves that we need to understand that we're one country with really similar values, maybe different ways of getting at them, but we all share that American dream and that American experience. Thank you so much. You guys have a great rest of your weekend and take care. And hopefully we can talk again soon.
Thank you.